He read the message twice and still couldn't breathe. She had seen everything, but said nothing for 3 days. Now silence sat at their table like a third person, polite and deadly. What do you do when the betrayal wasn't physical, but it still shattered the bones of trust? When two people stop hearing each other, sometimes they find comfort in strangers' voices. This is the story of two lives lived side by side, and the digital walls that rose between them. But not all distance ends in loss. Some ends are just the first step towards seeing each other again. The morning light sliced through the blinds in sharp lines, striping the kitchen floor like a barcode. The silence was not unfamiliar, but lately it had grown heavier, like dust settling in corners no one cared to clean. Kate stood at the counter, pouring hot water over a French press. The aroma of dark roast filled the air, earthy and grounding. She didn't look up when Mark walked in, just slid his mug across the counter with a practiced motion. He nodded his thanks, eyes still fogged with the glow of his phone. Notifications pulsed like distant sirens, urgent and constant. They used to talk in the mornings, not just about the day ahead, but about dreams they'd had, stupid memes, philosophical arguments about whether time was real. Now, mornings were like passing through customs, polite, transactional, weary. Outside, the street was quiet. A squirrel darted across the power line like it was late for something. Inside, the hum of two laptops booting up overlapped with the low grumble of the dishwasher. A symphony of domestic automation. Kate disappeared into the guest bedroom, her new office. She slid the door shut with a soft click. Her laptop lit up her face as she connected to her first call. Her voice shifted, professional, clipped, efficient. Yes, I've seen the deck. We need to tighten the timeline on phase 2. Across the hall, Mark adjusted his chair in what used to be their reading nook. He slipped on noise-canceling headphones and opened 4 tabs at once. One for code, one for server logs, one for Slack, and one for a VR architecture project he hadn't told Kate about. It wasn't secrecy. It just never seemed like the right moment. By noon, they had exchanged maybe 5 words. Do you want lunch? Not hungry yet. Okay. Silence again. Not cold, but tired. Their dog, Buster, wandered between rooms, tail swishing uncertainly, as if trying to remind them that they still lived in the same space. He whined at the door once, then gave up and curled into a tight, patient ball on the rug. At night, Kate closed her laptop with a sigh that carried more weight than words ever could. Mark was still in his chair, eyes glassy from 12 hours of screen time. They ate dinner separately. She had soup. He reheated something frozen. They watched separate shows on opposite sides of the couch, headphones in. The house that once rang with laughter, wine glasses clinking, spontaneous dancing in socks, had become divided terrain. Not through malice, through neglect, through work, through isolation disguised as connection. Later that night, as the rain began to patter against the windows, Kate lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Mark was beside her, but it felt like he was 1,000 miles away, behind a firewall she didn't have the password for. They had built a life together. Now they were roommates in a house split by invisible lines. Work schedules, stress fractures, digital doors that never quite closed, but never really opened either. And neither of them knew when it had started, or whether it could be stopped. The smell of toasted sourdough drifted through the kitchen, warm and nostalgic, but it fell flat against the stillness. Kate sat at the table, scrolling through her inbox, her fingers twitching unconsciously, eyebrows furrowed. Her plate sat untouched. A single egg, overcooked, yolk hardened into a dull yellow coin. Mark entered quietly, his presence acknowledged only by the soft creak of the floorboard beneath him. He didn't speak, just poured his coffee, the sound sharp against the quiet, and sat across from her like a stranger on a train. "Morning," he said finally, voice hoarse from disuse. Kate didn't look up. "Morning." That was all. Between them sat a table once cluttered with travel books and open laptops filled with Airbnb tabs. Now, just two phones and a ticking wall clock that seemed louder than necessary. Mark was the first to break the illusion of calm. "I've got back-to-back calls until 3. After that, I might need to test the new beta. Might go late." Kate nodded. "I'm in client syncs all day. London team is pushing timelines again." They chewed in silence. Not hostile, just hollow. Buster scratched at the glass door leading to the back deck. Kate stood to let him out, pausing briefly to glance at the sky, gray, indifferent, threatening rain. When she sat back down, Mark had already put in his AirPods and was reading something dense on his tablet, one hand absently stirring his coffee until it sloshed. He hadn't noticed the toast she made for him. It sat growing cold. They used to argue about ridiculous things, who made better omelets, whether a trip to Portugal counted as real travel if they stayed in tourist districts. Now, words were rationed like water in a drought. Every sentence measured, filtered, safe. Around noon, Kate took her lunch at her desk. A salad in a plastic bowl, her webcam angled to catch just enough of her face to feign interest. She smiled when she needed to, nodded when expected. All the while, her inbox beeped and blinked, her team pinged her for approvals, and her mind wandered. When did we stop? Anything? In the other room, Mark sat in his ergonomic chair, eyes locked to code. He was deep into a machine learning model, the kind that simulated emotional responses in AI companions. Ironic, maybe. His phone buzzed, a message from Rachel, a colleague in his dev team. "Can't believe we pulled that off. You're a machine." He smiled, the first genuine smile of the day. By dinner, Kate was too tired to speak. She microwaved leftovers and stood by the window while eating, watching Buster chase shadows across the lawn. Mark stayed in the office. When they passed each other brushing their teeth, they didn't speak. The silence was no longer awkward. It was expected, worn in, like an old coat neither of them remembered buying. Mark's laptop screen glowed against his face like moonlight through stained glass. It was past 10, and the rest of the house had gone quiet, save for the distant hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood. His headset was on, the world outside blocked out. Inside the screen, Rachel. Her face filled a small window in the top right corner. Warm lighting, curly dark hair pulled back in a loose bun, a half-empty glass of wine next to her keyboard. "We're the last ones on again," she said with a wry smile. Everyone else bailed after the presentation. Mark chuckled. "Guess that makes us the unlucky dedicated. We're just masochists." He liked talking to her. With Rachel, there were no long silences to navigate, no eggshells. She was sharp, quick-witted, confident. Their banter was easy, comforting. She teased him about his lack of emojis. He told her she used too many. She laughed the way Kate used to. "Anyway," Rachel said, stretching, "your segment on adaptive UI was kind of brilliant. You know that, right?" "Appreciate it," he said, and looked away, embarrassed but pleased. That kind of praise had become rare. Back in the guest bedroom, Kate was also online, though her world looked different. Her Zoom class filled the screen, A leadership-intensive course with grainy video feeds tiled across like pieces of a fractured mosaic. At the center of it all was Noah, her mentor. His voice had weight. It wasn't loud, but it filled the space. Measured, articulate, present. Leadership isn't control, he was saying. It's presence. It's knowing who you are before you try to guide others. Kate scribbled something in the margins of her notebook and then paused. She wasn't sure what she was writing anymore. She glanced up, catching Noah's eyes through the screen, dark, thoughtful, and entirely focused. He asked, "Kate, what's one thing you've forgotten to give yourself permission to feel this week?" She froze. I think I've forgotten to feel like I matter," she said before she could stop herself. Her voice was quiet, but steady. Noah nodded, not with pity, but with recognition. "That's an honest answer. Start there." Later that night, when both screens had dimmed and the laptops had finally closed, neither Kate nor Mark spoke about what they'd been doing. Mark lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Kate scrolled through her messages, paused at one from Noah. "Thank you for showing up today. You're stronger than you think." On Mark's phone, Rachel had sent a simple, "Still smiling about our call. You're easy to talk to." He typed something, then erased it. In the dark, they both turned away from each other. The voices they now craved were no longer in the room. They lived behind glass, and they were starting to feel more real than the silence between them. The train hummed softly beneath Kate's seat, rhythmic and distant, as if marking time differently from the world she'd left behind. The Pacific Northwest landscape blurred past the window, misty evergreens, tired gas stations, the skeletal remains of old barns. She wasn't visiting her friend in Portland. That was the story she told Mark. The real destination sat across a quiet table in a cafe by the Willamette River. Noah. He stood when she walked in, his frame tall but relaxed, a charcoal coat over a navy sweater, collar slightly askew. He smiled, not broadly, but with the kind of sincerity that made her feel noticed. Noticed in a way that was dangerous. "You made it," he said. She nodded, sliding into the seat across from him. "I needed some air." Outside, the city moved with Friday ease. Inside, time slowed. The cafe was dim, lit by hanging bulbs and flares of sun catching in steam rising from their cups. They talked about her course, about his background, his divorce, his daughter, the way he found purpose again in helping others find theirs. He didn't flirt, but he saw her, asked questions that dug beneath the surface. When she mentioned Mark, he tilted his head slightly. "Does he still ask you who you want to become?" Noah asked. Kate blinked. "No one's asked me that in a long time." Hours passed. Rain began to drizzle against the wide glass windows, softening the world. She reached for her coat, but stopped when their hands brushed. His fingers were warm, and he didn't move them. Neither did she. Across the country, in a dark apartment in Seattle, Mark sat on his couch, a glowing laptop on the coffee table. Rachel appeared in perfect resolution, no lag, no blur. She was in her kitchen, cooking, camera angled casually, the domesticity of it oddly intimate. "I'm making mushroom risotto," she said, "which I may or may not screw up, depending on your ability to distract me." Mark grinned. "I'm already flattered you're cooking and conferencing at the same time." "Multitasking is love," she quipped, raising a glass of wine to the screen. They watched a film together, streamed in sync, chatting in the sidebar. It wasn't romantic. Not explicitly. But the laughter, the glances, the softness between jokes, those were the threads being pulled taut. Later, when the call ended and the silence returned, Mark didn't feel alone. And maybe that was the real betrayal. Kate returned home after dark. The hallway light cast long shadows. Mark didn't ask how the weekend went. She didn't offer. Instead, they both stood in the kitchen, not quite touching, not quite talking. Through the looking glass, they had found reflections of themselves. But they no longer saw each other clearly. The kitchen light was low, casting a faint golden haze over the stainless steel countertops. Kate stood barefoot on the cold tile floor, gently stirring oat milk into Mark's coffee. She added just a pinch of cinnamon, something he used to love but hadn't asked for in months. The smell rose into the quiet like a peace offering. She carried the mug toward his office, hesitated at the door. He sat hunched at his desk, immersed in layers of code and blinking notifications. His VR headset rested beside him, charged and waiting. Kate watched his profile for a second too long. "Hey," she said softly. "Thought you might want something warm." Mark turned halfway, surprised. "Thanks," he said, accepting the mug but not looking her in the eye. "Appreciate it." She waited a beat. "Can we talk?" His shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. "Now." Kate hesitated, then shook her head. "Later's fine." But later never came. That evening, Mark slipped on the headset and vanished into his project. Kate watched from the hallway, his body still, the screen reflected faintly in his glasses as the world around him dissolved into simulation. In his virtual space, walls didn't exist. Neither did tension or second-guessing. There was only clarity, control, and Rachel's voice echoing in his ear. "You're building something beautiful." Kate retreated to their bedroom. She sat cross-legged on the floor with her phone, scrolling through old photos. Herself and Mark on a cliffside hike in Banff, wind-whipped and laughing. The light in their eyes, the way they reached for each other without thinking, it felt like another life. She opened her voice recorder, thumb hovering over the red button. Then, quietly, she began. "I don't know when it stopped," she said, her voice low, steady. "When I started feeling invisible, or when you started feeling so far away that even your silence didn't sound like you anymore. I met someone who listened, just listened, and I think I needed that more than I realized." She hit pause. She didn't send the message. Not yet. In the dark, Mark lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. His laptop blinked softly beside him. Rachel had written, "Still thinking about that film. The scene where they don't say, 'I love you,' but you know they mean it." That wrecked me. He read the message. Typed, "Yeah, that hit me too." But he didn't send it. They both lay awake in parallel silences, neither ready to confess, neither ready to let go. Downstairs, Buster shifted restlessly in his sleep, whining softly. Morning would come, but the glass walls between them were thicker than ever. And still, no one had knocked. The storm began before the clouds arrived. Kate moved through the house like someone rearranging a museum display. Quiet, deliberate, disconnected from the meaning behind each object. She set the table for two, smoothing the linen placemats with unnecessary care. A bottle of red breathed on the counter. Pasta simmered on the stove, garlic and rosemary perfuming the air. The dining room glowed softly under the pendant light, warm like nostalgia. She wore the red dress, not for the drama of it, but because she remembered how his eyes lingered the first time she wore it. That memory had felt real enough to bring it back out. Mark was late. Again. When he came in, backpack slung over one shoulder, his expression was drained, eyes glazed from hours of screen time. He paused at the doorway, catching sight of the table, the dress. "You cooked?" he asked, almost confused. Kate gave a small smile. "Just wanted a night." not on a screen. He dropped his bag by the stairs. I wish you'd told me. I had the VR demo with Rachel. It went long. She stood still. You didn't check your messages. I've been buried. It's been nonstop this week. I know, she said. It's always nonstop now. The silence between them stretched like cellophane, clear but suffocating. They sat. They ate. The pasta had cooled. Conversation scraped along the surface, updates on deadlines, weather, a neighbor's new fence. Halfway through the second glass of wine, Kate set down her fork. Do you even see me anymore? Mark looked up sharply. What? I mean, really see me? The way you used to? Or am I just a background window now? He stared at her, stunned into stillness. Then, that's not fair, isn't it? Her voice wavered, but she didn't lower it. I've been trying to hold this house together with string and silence. You're always plugged in. I talk to you and get a buffering icon. He shook his head. You think I don't notice how you're never present either? You live in your calls and your courses, and that mentor who always seems to know just what you need. Her eyes narrowed. Don't turn this on me. Why not? He snapped. We're both ghosts in this house. The words hung in the air, shocking in their accuracy. Neither moved. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. The windows rattled faintly. Finally, Kate pushed her chair back. I don't know how to keep doing this. Mark looked down at his hands, then said quietly, I don't know if we are doing this. She left the room. He didn't follow. The storm broke overhead. Rain slashed at the glass. And still, they sat in separate rooms, hearts cracking not from betrayal, but from the slow collapse of what they once believed unshakable. Monday returned like a habit. Kate's heels clicked faintly against the hardwood as she passed Mark's office. His door was ajar, and she caught a glimpse of him through the gap, hair disheveled, eyes red-rimmed, a mug of coffee long since gone cold on his desk. He was already deep into his world, keys clicking at a frantic rhythm. She didn't interrupt. She wasn't sure she was welcome there anymore. By 9, she was locked into back-to-back calls. Her webcam framed her face with clinical precision, cheekbones lit by soft ring light, lips painted in her usual muted rose, eyes alert, practiced. But beneath the polish, she felt thin, hollowed out by long days of forced energy. Noah's messages had become a quiet lifeline. That afternoon, between client sessions, she reread one. Leadership starts with presence. You can't lead a life you're not living in. She typed back, what if you don't know where you're living anymore? His reply came almost instantly. Then it's time to go looking. Start with your voice. You've stopped using it. Across the hallway, Mark was pacing. The code wasn't compiling. The beta had bugs. He was supposed to demo the AI interaction layer by Friday, but his mind drifted to Rachel. He pulled out his phone. No hesitation this time. Need a 5-minute distraction. Or a miracle. She replied, both. Zoom. A moment later, her face filled the screen, curled hair still damp, hoodie oversized, background blurred just enough to suggest a lived-in life she didn't apologize for. She grinned. Let's fix your mess. Mark laughed. A real, effortless laugh that felt foreign even to himself. She teased him about his variable names, told him she secretly judged his keyboard for being too loud. Then they drifted, off the code, into music, books, the strange nostalgia of growing up during dial-up internet. At some point, she said, you light up when you talk about things that aren't work. You know that, right? He didn't know. Not lately. That night, Kate sat on the floor in the corner of their bedroom, a sketchpad balanced on her knees. She'd forgotten how much she used to draw. Faces, windows, empty streets. She started again, slowly, as if tracing memory back into existence. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the quiet thrill of making something that wasn't a deliverable. Later, she opened a message window. Noah was online. I drew something tonight. For the first time in years. His reply came back. Then something real is waking up in you. Don't ignore it. Across the hall, Mark was staring at Rachel's latest message. You know, we'd make a hell of a team. Even outside the code. He typed, erased. Typed again. Didn't send. 2 people. 1 house. 2 full lives now split between tabs and time zones. And neither knew which version of themselves was still the real one. Kate wasn't snooping. That's what she told herself. She had gone into Mark's office to look for a charger. That's all. The afternoon light slanted through the blinds in pale stripes, cutting across the desk, the chair, the familiar clutter, headphones, energy drink cans, a notebook filled with sharp, angular sketches of interface designs. Her fingers brushed over the keyboard out of habit, waking the screen. That's when she saw it. A message thread still open. Rachel's name at the top. The last message short, bright, casual. Couldn't stop smiling after last night. Still can't. No emojis. No exclamation marks. But Kate didn't need them. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't read further. She didn't have to. The tone was unmistakable. Not explicit, but emotionally charged in a way that felt worse than sex. Worse because it was soft, intimate, effortless. She left the room without the charger. That night, Mark noticed something had shifted. Kate's eyes had the clarity of someone who knew something they weren't ready to speak. She was quieter, her movements sharper, like a knife newly honed. She didn't mention Rachel. Instead, she reached out to someone else. Noah's voice filled her headphones, smooth and grounded. His seminar had ended, but he stayed behind for her. They talked one-on-one. No cameras, just voice. I think I'm unraveling, she said quietly. No, he replied. You're waking up. That can look the same at first. She felt her eyes sting. I don't even know what I want. To leave? To stay? To forgive? To be someone else entirely? Noah didn't offer advice. Only this. Ask yourself who you would be if no one else was watching. After the call, she recorded a short message for herself. I saw something today, and it broke something open. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt everything go quiet. I don't know what I'll do with that silence yet. Meanwhile, Mark stared at Rachel's message for the 100th time. He had written and deleted at least 4 responses, some flirtatious, some guilty, one that just said, I don't know how to be a husband anymore. None of them were sent. Instead, he opened an old folder on his computer, honeymoon_videos. He hadn't looked at them in years. On screen, he and Kate danced barefoot on a balcony in Lisbon, twirling under fairy lights, laughing into each other's mouths. He paused the video on a frame where she was mid-laugh, eyes closed. Now, in the dark of their shared bedroom, they both lay in bed again, side by side, back to back. Her hand near his, but not reaching. His breath steady, pretending to be asleep. The illusion wasn't just closeness. It was that neither of them had already left. The sky cracked open just after 8 p.m., a raw, heavy thunder that made the windows tremble. Rain followed in sheets, sudden and furious, drenching the backyard in silver. Inside, the tension had been building all day. The storm outside was only an echo of what was already brewing. Kate stood in the kitchen, her hand frozen mid-stir over a pan of vegetables. She hadn't planned dinner. She was just moving, filling space. Mark walked in behind her, shaking water from his jacket, soaked from a trip to the store. A pointless errand, probably just an excuse to leave the house. He opened the fridge, glanced at the stove. "You cooking something?" "I guess," she said flatly. He poured himself a glass of water, leaned against the counter. The silence between them was sharp, a blade honed over weeks of quiet wounds. Kate finally turned toward him. "Who is Rachel to you?" The question dropped with the force of a slammed door. Mark blinked. "What?" "I saw your messages." He set the glass down slowly. "Kate, I'm not accusing," she interrupted. "I'm asking. Because I need to know if I'm crazy for feeling like I don't even exist in this house anymore." Mark ran a hand through his hair. "She's a colleague." "Don't do that," she snapped. "Don't play semantics." "Not now." He sighed, exhausted, cornered. "I didn't sleep with her. We talk. We work. And yes, it's become more. But not like that." Kate stared at him. "More is the part that hurts. The part where you laugh with her when you haven't laughed with me in months. The part where you tell her things I used to be the first to hear." His jaw tightened. "And what about Noah?" Her breath caught. "What? You think I didn't notice how often you're messaging him? How your voice changes when you say his name? You've been leaning on him for weeks." "At least he listens," she said bitterly. "At least he asks how I feel." "So you get a pass because it's emotional?" Mark said. "Because it's spiritual or professional or dressed up as some healing journey." "Come on, Kate." We both checked out. The words echoed, cutting clean. They stood facing each other, rain drumming the windows, thunder rolling like distant artillery. The room felt too bright, too exposed. Kate's voice trembled. "We used to fight for each other. Now we just fight." Mark didn't reply. She set the spatula down, walked out of the kitchen, past the hallway, into the bedroom. He didn't follow. He stood alone, watching the storm rage just beyond the glass, wondering when the damage had begun, wondering if it was still possible to rebuild something that now felt more like rubble than home. And upstairs, Kate cried silently into a pillow, not for the betrayal, but for the strangers they had become. The silence that followed the fight wasn't heavy. It was hollow, echoing, as if the house had exhaled and refused to breathe back in. They no longer orbited each other. They simply coexisted, like misplaced furniture. Kate spent most of her time in the spare bedroom, surrounded by books she didn't finish and notebooks filled with half-thoughts. She scrolled endlessly through old photos, old messages, trying to find the thread where everything started to unravel. Each image was a shard, bright, beautiful, cutting. A honeymoon snapshot of Mark kissing her shoulder in a sun-drenched alley. A blurry selfie on their first couch. Her birthday last year, both smiling with cake smeared across their lips. She paused on that one. They had kissed after. It had tasted like sugar and laughter. Now she could barely remember the texture of his skin. Downstairs, Mark recorded a video on his phone. Not for Rachel. Not for posting. For himself. He sat on the floor, hair unwashed, a hoodie pulled up over his ears. The screen reflected his own tired eyes. "I think I stopped trying," he said, voice raw. "Not just with you. With everything. I stopped showing up. I built a world I could control, and I lived in it. And now this house feels like a hotel I'm afraid to check out of." He stopped the recording. Didn't delete it. Just closed the app and let the screen go dark. Buster padded into the room, ears flicking, tail slow and uncertain. Mark looked at the dog and whispered, "I don't think she loves me anymore." Buster tilted his head, blinked. "Or maybe she does," Mark added. "And I just don't know what that looks like anymore." That evening, Kate sat by the window, legs tucked under her. She was sketching again, no people this time. Just fragments, broken teacups, doors left ajar, staircases leading nowhere. She wasn't trying to be symbolic. It just came out that way. Mark entered the room. He didn't speak, just stood there, watching her draw. "I think we broke it," she said without looking up. Mark nodded. "I know. But maybe," she continued slowly, "it's not about putting it back together the same way." He knelt beside her. Not close, not touching, just near. "What if we started with a walk?" she asked. He looked surprised, then grateful. "Yeah, okay." The next morning, they walked side by side in silence. No headphones, no phones, just the sound of wet leaves underfoot and the soft wheeze of Buster trotting ahead. They didn't hold hands, but they didn't turn away. At the edge of a small lake, they stopped. The water reflected them, blurred and imperfect, but together in the same frame. It wasn't resolution. It was space. And that, for now, was enough. Rain drizzled over the porch roof, soft and steady, like a memory being rewritten in real time. Mark and Kate sat side by side on the weathered wooden bench, wrapped in separate blankets, holding identical mugs of coffee that had long gone lukewarm. Neither had spoken in over 5 minutes. And yet, this silence was different, less like an absence, more like a pause. Kate stared out at the yard. The garden was overgrown now, lavender strangled by weeds, the basil long dead. "I used to love the rain," she said finally. Mark glanced sideways. "You still do." "Not lately." She sipped from her mug, grimaced. "Cold. I can warm it up." "It's okay," she said. "I kind of like it bitter right now." He nodded, then asked, "Can I ask you something?" Kate didn't look at him, but her voice was soft. "Go ahead." "That guy, Noah, was it more than talking?" The question didn't land like an accusation. It was almost sad. Not jealous, not angry, just fragile. Kate shook her head slowly. "No, not physically, but emotionally. Yeah, it became something I leaned on, something I hid." He absorbed that without flinching. She looked at him. "What about Rachel?" Mark hesitated. "We got close. She understood parts of me I hadn't looked at in a long time. I wanted to be seen. She saw me, but it wasn't love, not even really desire. Just a place to hide. A pause. "And you didn't think I'd understand?" she asked. "I didn't think you were looking at me anymore." Kate let out a soft breath, something between a sigh and a laugh. "I wasn't." They fell quiet again. The rain grew heavier, drumming a rhythm on the roof above them. "I keep wondering," Kate said after a while, "how two people who loved each other so much got here." Mark looked down at his hands. "I think we stopped being curious." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "We stopped asking questions. We assumed we knew everything about each other. And then the silence came, and we were too tired to ask why." Kate pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "That's true." He looked up. "Do you still want to know who I am?" She didn't answer right away. "Then, I think I do. But I want to learn without assuming I already know the ending." Thunder rolled distantly, low and long. Kate reached out, her hand brushing his fingers. He didn't grip it. Neither did she. But the contact lingered. A promise. Or maybe just a question. They sat like that for a long time. Two people softened by honesty, cracked open by mistakes, and still, somehow, not fully broken. The rain didn't stop, but it wasn't drowning them anymore. The morning light in Rachel's New York apartment filtered through tall windows, casting long rectangles across her hardwood floors. A half-packed suitcase sat open on the bed, clothes folded with clinical precision, like she was preparing for something more than travel. Closure, maybe. She sat cross-legged on the floor, laptop open in front of her. Mark's name glowed softly in the chat window. She'd typed the message 3 times already, deleted it twice. Finally, she let it stand. I care about you, but I won't be the reason something ends that once mattered. Go figure out what's still worth saving. And if there's anything left, choose it. Not because it's safe, because it's honest. She stared at it, then hit send. No dramatic flourish. No tears. Just a truth set loose. Across the country, in a quieter part of San Francisco, Noah stood behind a long wooden table, arranging chairs for an in-person workshop. It was the first time he'd opened the doors to his studio since the pandemic. Sunlight caught in dust motes that spun lazily through the air. A teapot whistled in the kitchenette. He moved with the calm certainty of someone who had once broken entirely and learned how to live with the cracks. His phone buzzed. A message from Kate. Thank you for helping me find my voice again. I won't be attending the workshop. There's something here I need to stay present for. He smiled, not with regret, but with a kind of quiet pride. He typed back, then you've already passed the course. Be well, Kate. Be brave. In Seattle, Kate set the phone down, her fingers lingering on the screen for just a moment longer than necessary. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. But something inside her felt lighter. She walked into the living room where Mark sat with a sketchpad in his lap, something she hadn't seen in years. He looked up, surprised. You draw now? Kate shrugged. I remembered how good it felt to make something. Without a deadline. He held up the pad. Clumsy attempts at perspective and shape. It's bad, but kind of fun. She sat beside him, curling her knees under her. Want to take a walk later? He nodded. No phones. No noise. Outside, Buster barked once, then chased a squirrel across the yard, disrupting the silence with joy. Rachel zipped up her suitcase. Noah opened his studio door to a group of new faces. And Mark and Kate, 2 people no longer anchored by false stories, stood on the edge of something unspoken. Not reconciliation, but possibility. The kind that starts when you no longer need other voices to hear your own. They stood at the edge of their own home, uncertain how to re-enter it. Not physically, but honestly. The living room, once the center of shared life, had become neutral ground. No longer a battlefield, but not quite sanctuary. Kate broke the quiet first. 1 week, she said. Mark blinked. What? No screens. No laptops. No phones unless it's an emergency. Just us. In this house. For 7 days. He stared at her, unsure whether to laugh or flinch. She added, You can say no. He didn't. Instead, that night, they collected their devices in a shoebox. Mark turned off the router with a dramatic flourish, earning a half-smile from Kate that disappeared almost as quickly as it came. They set up rules. No work talk. No silent treatment. No faking interest. Only truth, or nothing at all. The first day was brutal. Kate's fingers twitched constantly, reaching for phantom vibrations. Mark paced without purpose, unable to code or retreat into virtual space. The air between them felt thin, like a room with too little oxygen. By day 2, things began to shift. They cleaned the guest bedroom together, found an old deck of cards, and played gin rummy while Buster watched from under the table like a skeptical referee. They rediscovered the record player Mark had bought years ago, put on a warped Nina Simone album, and listened as the notes cracked and fluttered. Kate burned the pasta on day 3. They ate it anyway. Mark joked that it was texturally adventurous. She laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like months. On day 4, Mark found Kate sketching by the window. He didn't speak, just sat beside her, handing her a pencil he'd sharpened for her. She looked at it for a moment too long, then drew a doorway opening into a garden. By day 5, the house began to soften. They played music while folding laundry. They talked about books they'd never finished. Mark admitted he'd lied about liking her turmeric smoothies. She admitted she hated his favorite sci-fi show. They kissed on day 6, not out of habit, but out of shared breath, a flicker of memory rediscovered. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even long. But it was honest. On the 7th morning, the sun cut through the windows in wide golden sheets. Kate made pancakes. Mark set the table. No background noise. Just the clink of forks and Buster's gentle snore. They didn't speak of forgiveness. They spoke of walks they might take next weekend. Places they hadn't been in years. When the week ended, they stood before the box of phones in silence. Mark said, "We don't have to go back." Kate nodded. "We can go forward instead." And for the first time in a long time, they left the room, together. The auditorium was digital, but the stakes were real. Mark sat alone in their home office, the walls behind him blurred by the conference platform's background filter. He wore a dark shirt, clean-shaven, hair combed, face steady. Dozens of attendees watched from across the globe, coders, engineers, executives. This was supposed to be the highlight of his year, unveiling the new AI interface his team had spent months perfecting. Rachel wasn't on the call. He had asked her not to be. A panelist introduced him with enthusiastic jargon. Words like innovator, pioneer, disruptor. Mark smiled politely. His slides waited in queue. The talking points were rehearsed. But when his camera turned live, he didn't start with the product. He started with the silence. "I was supposed to show you something today," he began. "But I think what I need to share is something else." He paused, let the hush settle. "This last year, I built things I was proud of. Clean systems, elegant logic. But while I was refining all of that, I lost the ability to talk to the person sitting 10 feet away from me. My wife." A few people leaned in closer to their screens. "I thought being productive meant being successful. That hours spent working were a currency I could later trade for peace, or time, or love. But it doesn't work that way. Because presence isn't something you schedule. Connection doesn't queue." The moderator blinked, unsure whether to interrupt. Mark continued, "I made mistakes. I found comfort in someone else's attention because it was easier than facing the distance I'd let grow at home. I was a ghost behind a screen, convincing myself I was still part of the world." His voice cracked slightly. He didn't hide it. "I'm not here to confess. I'm here because we keep building tools to connect people, and keep forgetting how to be with each other. Truly, without noise." He clicked forward once. The presentation screen didn't show code. It showed a simple line drawing. Two people sitting on opposite sides of a couch, facing away from each other. Between them, a glowing screen. Below it, a caption. "How many more updates until we remember how to look each other in the eye?" Silence. Then, one by one, the chat window began to populate. "Thank you for saying that. This hit hard. My husband and I are in the same place. Damn, needed this more than the demo." When the talk ended, he didn't log off immediately. Instead, he sat in the glow of the screen, heart hammering, breath shallow, staring at his own face in the corner window. In the hallway, Kate had been listening. Not spying. Listening. She walked in slowly, stopped at the threshold. "You showed up," she said. He turned. "I think it's the first time in a long time." They didn't touch. But the air between them had changed. They had stopped pretending. And that, more than code, more than confession, was the beginning of truth. The ocean stretched out in front of her, gray-blue and endless, its surface rough with wind but hypnotic in its rhythm. Kate stood on the edge of a cliff in Cannon Beach, the same place she and Mark had once come during their first year of marriage, back when they thought time would always wait. She wore a windbreaker zipped to her throat, her hair pulled back tight against the gusts. In one hand, a pen. In the other, a notebook worn soft at the edges. She sat on a large flat rock, legs folded beneath her, and began to write. "Dear Mark," she wrote, "this isn't a goodbye, but it also isn't a love letter in the way you might expect." Below her, waves crashed against the rock face in slow, steady violence. Salt hung in the air. She inhaled it deeply before continuing. "I don't know what we are right now. We're not what we were. And maybe that's a gift, because what we were was fading, even before we admitted it." Her handwriting faltered slightly on the next line. "You and I, we stopped looking. We stopped asking. We let the noise of the world drown out the sound of our own hearts. And instead of fighting it, we slipped quietly into other voices, other screens, other stories." She paused, looked out at the water. A gull cried above her, spiraling low, then vanished out over the sea. "I met someone who reminded me that I still exist, who showed me that I've been sleepwalking through my life. But he's not the reason I woke up. I am, and I want you to know that." She flipped the page. "I'm writing this because I need to let go of who we were, not out of anger, but out of reverence. We were beautiful once, honest, clumsy, brave. I want to honor that by not dragging it forward like a ghost." The final lines came slowly, but with certainty. "I want to start over. Not because I believe it'll be easy, but because I believe we're not finished yet. We just haven't met as we are now. So meet me, tomorrow, at the station. Let's pretend it's our first time." She closed the notebook. Then she tore the page from its spine, folded it carefully, and held it to her chest for one long moment. Then, without hesitation, she set it alight with a match from the cafe below and let the flame eat through the paper until only ash remained. The wind caught it and lifted it out to sea. Back in Seattle, she texted him, "Let's meet again. Tomorrow. Noon. Union Station. I'll be the one waiting." No more voice notes. No more ambiguity. Just a beginning. Waves crashed. Salt stung her lips. And Kate smiled. Union Station breathed with the quiet pulse of morning movement. The marble floors echoed with the shuffle of footsteps, the low murmur of announcements, the hiss of distant trains arriving and departing like promises kept or broken. Lights slanted in through the tall, arched windows, painting golden grids across travelers and benches in time. Mark stood near the old brass clock in the center of the terminal, a small bouquet of wildflowers clutched loosely in his hand. Not roses, nothing too rehearsed, just a handful of color and scent, imperfect, honest. He checked the time again. 5 minutes to noon. He hadn't shaved too close, hadn't worn cologne, but he had chosen the sweater Kate once said made him look almost romantic. His palms were damp, his heart ridiculous. A family passed by, 2 children dragging tiny suitcases. A woman in heels clicked by, phone pressed to her ear. And then, there she was. Kate stepped in through the main entrance, wrapped in a navy coat, her scarf fluttering slightly in the breeze she carried in with her. Her hair was pulled back simply. No makeup, no armor, just her. She saw him, slowed, then smiled. Not the strained curve she'd worn so many times the past year, but a beginning. She walked toward him, each step intentional, as if crossing into some new country. When they stood face to face, neither of them spoke at first. Then Kate said, "Hi, I'm Kate." Mark blinked, then smiled too. "Hi, Mark." They laughed, softly, but it was real. She glanced down at the bouquet. "Is this for someone else, or are you the poetic type?" He offered it. "For a stranger I'm hoping to get to know." She took it. They sat together on a nearby bench, just outside the streams of foot traffic. For a moment, they didn't fill the silence with chatter. Just sat, side by side, breathing. "Why a train station?" he asked. "Because it's where people start," she said. "Where they choose to go, where they leave old things behind." He looked at her. "And where they come back." She nodded. He reached for her hand. This time, she met him halfway. Fingers interlaced, not tight, not desperate. Curious. A train rolled in on track 5, and the station filled with the sound of motion. But for them, there was only stillness. They weren't healed. They weren't fixed. But they were present. And for the first time in a long time, they were choosing each other again, not as the people they used to be, but as two strangers meeting again, with eyes open, hearts scarred, and something real in their hands. The bouquet rustled between them, fragile and alive, just like them. Some endings are quiet. No final shouts, no slammed doors. Just the soft closing of a chapter you didn't realize had already ended. Kate and Mark didn't find their way back to who they were. That version of them had been gently dismantled by distance, by silence, by all the words they never said. But in that breaking, something else emerged. Not a return, but a beginning. They learned that love isn't maintained by proximity or routine. It survives in the decision to stay curious, to listen after the hurt, to see the person in front of you, not as memory, but as a stranger you're still choosing. The screens had separated them, but it was never about the technology. It was about presence. And sometimes, to rebuild something real, you don't look back. You meet each other again, fully, painfully, beautifully, as if for the first time. Because some love stories aren't rewound. They're rewritten.